Okay, so I've been asked to talk to you about next generation data platforms, which aside from being a bit of a mouthful, is a bit vague and undefined. And I'm going to try and bring a little bit of a definition, but at the same time, next generation data platforms or current generation data platforms are highly varied. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what people are doing around the world, and I guess what people's expectations are for how we manage data. And some of it may even line up with what your expectations are for how we manage the data that you collect. You never know. But firstly, who is this guy who's standing up here, and what's this Rezare Systems? So Rezare Systems is a software company, and we say that we're a custom or bespoke software company. So people contract us to create software products and tools for them. We used to be part of Ag Research, and back in 2004, a group of us said, actually, we could do this in our own company, and got entrepreneurial and set up our own company with five of us boldly going to go and develop software. We now have over 30 people, and we operate in Australia and the UK as well as in New Zealand. We come at software from an ag science background, which means that we understand by and large how to interpret what scientists are telling us, particularly if they speak slowly, and how to read papers and translate that into software code. And I guess that's our point of difference from all the thousands of other software companies that are around the world. Our speciality, because of where we come from, is in sort of animals and pasture and the data that goes with it. And there's a list of some of the people who we've worked with. I just popped up some names that I thought you might recognise. Obviously beef and lamb genetics, that's why we're here. But we also we work with one of our own products, which is Pure Farming, and some of you have encountered that. I know Robert Peacock, who was chairing the last session, has been helping us test a tool for capturing lambing data in the field using a mobile phone, those sorts of things. So that's the sort of thing that we do. We create mostly software products and services for other people. And as we've done that, we've ended up very much in that space of dealing with large data and how data is managed. And the way that data is managed has changed a lot from where it was when I started back in the late 80s, early 90s. So here's one definition of a data platform. It's a system for collecting, accessing and analysing large sets of data from disparate sources. So if you're dealing with a set of data in Excel on your laptop, it's probably not a big data platform. If you're dealing with data from one source, you could even argue that maybe that might or might not be a data platform. It's certainly a database. And here's some elements of a data platform. A data platform allows you to access data that has come from or might even be in multiple sources. Some databases pull it all together, I'll talk about that in a moment, and others actually suck it from different places when you need it. It controls access, and that's really important because there's a big concern in the industry that if I pop all my data into something, it might end up open slather. Anyone can do anything with my data. And I've had a variety of discussions with some of New Zealand's largest companies and cooperatives about what a data platform is, and if they participate in one, does it mean that everybody gets all of their top secret data? A data platform is not necessarily an application in itself. It might be something like InProve, which has some very specific uses, but it might also be a platform that enables other applications and tools to run. And certainly that's where we're heading in the world these days. And it provides or supports powerful analytics. It's great to pull lots of data together, but if you can't analyse it and do something interesting with it, you probably haven't gained a lot. So the good old days. The good old days when I started doing some of this stuff, it was nice and simple. We would come along with our white lab coats, or not quite, but we would come along and say, give us all your data, because we know best what to do with it. You're keeping it in lots of places where you're going to lose it, and give it to us and we'll sort it out and we'll give you the answer, because of course there's only one right answer. And we've, just as we heard this morning, that EBVs are not exact BVs, so there is not necessarily one right answer in how you should use your data as well. And I think we're now entering a new environment where data is spread around the agricultural community. And we talked about genotype by environment effects earlier, and we know that there's all sorts of information that we collect on our farms that tell us things about the farming system. And that is obviously things like the performance of your animals and their pedigree, their genetics effectively, but we collect information about how we manage our farms as well. We collect information about what the pasture's doing and what the weather is doing and what the long-term weather was and what the soils are like. We collect data using devices, and you may think you're not necessarily using many Internet of Things devices, but I would almost guarantee that somewhere on your farm or in your business there is something that is collecting data and talking back over the internet, which is really the definition of an Internet of Things device. We collect farm assurance data. We mostly collect traceability data. And again, we look at how nutrients and other things move around our farms. Huge amount of different data sets, and you could say, well, each one of those is an application in itself. You know, if I collect data and I put it into Overseer, well, it's just for establishing a nutrient budget for my farm. Or is it? Well, hang on. A lot of that data is the same data that you collected to do a feed budget for your farm. Some of that about how you manage your mobs is the same data that underlies a contemporary group on your farm. And so you can see data starts to actually get linked together. The hard challenge for those of us who are busy developing databases and data systems is that there means there's no kind of one source of the truth. There's no one central database that you put all your data into anymore. Instead, there's a plethora of different tools, different organisations collecting data. And again, you know this yourselves. You deal with different organisations to provide your fertiliser products, and they go and do analyses and collect various pieces of data. You work with your meat processor, and they collect data, and those are stored in quite different places. And so the challenge nowadays is, how do you hook this data together? How do you make it cooperate and collaborate? And it's never quite as easy as we think it's going to be. So here's some barriers that I think exist to effective use of data. And I'd be interested later on in the questions time whether you think these are real barriers or not. These are certainly comments that I've heard from people. Whose data is it anyway? Often said about data that's been collected by a fertiliser spreader or a harvester or a meat processor. And what are they using my data for? Often said about an industry organisation. Or when we go to do work with people, we get this comment, sorry, we can't share that data, you know, Privacy Act and all that. Discovery, I work with lots of software developers from different companies, often lots of startups nowadays who are busy. They've thought of a great app in the ag space that they want to launch, and they assume nobody's ever done this before. I'm going to have to start from scratch and invent everything. Or they say, surely there must be some data on soils. How do we access that data? And so data tends to be not easily discoverable. And finally, we get to the challenge of interoperability. And I've certainly talked to some companies and said, look, farmers would really like to reuse the data that you've collected on their behalf. Oh, absolutely. Yes, we can export that to a CSV file. And then the farmer just has to open that in Excel, reformat that, delete a few columns, change the headings, hopefully not stuff up any of the EIDs or other data while they're doing that, and load it into whatever system it is for them to use. Yeah, I see a few people nodding. Yeah, and I tend to say nowadays CSV files and Excel files are the bane of our lives, because we go, oh yeah, we can import that data, and it's never quite what you expect. Or companies define their own format for data, and it's a different format for every company, which means if you're trying to use data from multiple sources, how many meat processors do we deal with in New Zealand? It's different for everyone. And so these are the sorts of challenges that I think exist out there. I put this slide in because I thought somebody's going to say to me during this session, but isn't blockchain going to solve all of that? Who's heard of blockchain? There's a few hands going up. It's a bit hard not to hear of blockchain nowadays because just about every second sort of article, certainly in the data space, is how blockchain's going to solve all of these problems for us. And what is blockchain? Well, firstly, it's a lot of math, and it's a lot of math supporting encryption, the ability to encrypt or digitally sign pieces of data. And blockchain's really useful when we move from that centralized environment where there's one source past the decentralized environment that we've got at the moment where there's lots of organizations holding bits of data on your behalf to a totally distributed model where everyone holds a copy of every piece of data, which is what the blockchain says. And blockchain's really good for holding information like digital currency, where you want to make sure nobody can hack into the website that holds your currency and steal it or transfer it from one person to another. Because if everybody's got a copy of the same information, then you can't just hack into one website to do that. They have this thing called proof of work, and proof of work is a way of proving that a person processing some data has processed it correctly and isn't just a hacker kind of slipping in and sneakily changing some data. And that's good to know. One of the challenges with the blockchain at the moment is that with our proof of work things is they require a lot of computer power, a lot of number crunching. And so storing each bit of data in the blockchain is a bit like running an NZGE analysis. Yep. We run them once a week, don't we? So if you can imagine each time you're storing data in the blockchain, if you scale that up, pretty soon, if we stored the world's data in the blockchain, we'd need nuclear power plants in every city in the world just to run the blockchain. So we've got a few challenges to work out there. So my long and short story is, let's not in the short term rely on the blockchain to solve this problem for us of where we store all of our data. Talk to me more later if you want. I've found this a useful way of thinking about data platforms. And this work came out of the Dutch Technology Centre in 2016. And before that, it came through some work that was being done in the medical space in Europe on open science platforms. And it is very science-oriented, but I think it actually applies a lot to a lot of our other data platforms we use as an industry. They say that there are 4 elements carefully chosen, I think, to come up with a good mnemonic: fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Findable means there's some electronic way to discover who holds what data, what it is, where it is this the same piece of data we were talking about? So unique identifiers. Metadata that describes the data and how it was measured and who recorded it and what fit for purpose it is. Protocols that make that data accessible and control who can access it. Shared vocabularies that mean that it can interoperate and we don't need to do stuff via CSV files in Excel. And reusable, so some sort of licensing or way of controlling how organisations use and reuse data and allowing or even encouraging data to be reused appropriately. So those are the features that they talk about in terms of an open science platform. So it's here I want to just turn quickly to the New Zealand Farm Data Initiatives, which are an initiative of DRNZ and RMPP. And it's all right, I'm nearly done. They're obviously funded by the industry primary growth partnerships. Three work streams: a code of practice, which helps organisations and farmers to understand what rights you and the organisation has to data. A common vocabulary, that's the farm data standards, and a standards-based interchange framework. I'm going to carry on. The Farm Data Code of Practice was developed over a few years by some 60 different organisations. Most of them are the organisations that you interact with in your daily life as farmers or industry service providers. It doesn't take a particular view. It doesn't say that farmers own all data. It doesn't say that organisations own all data. In fact, data ownership can be a bit troubling in itself. But what it does require is clear contractual terms and conditions that farmers can read and understand so that you know what rights you've got in the data and what rights and obligations the companies have in their data. It requires that organisations make data available in reusable formats, and it requires that they've got some policies in place to secure that data. Really simple. There's an accreditation process, and I put an X by the accreditation process, which was developed with Beef and Lamb New Zealand and Dairy New Zealand, and the Meat Industry Association and the Dairy Companies Association and Federated Farmers and various others. We've been quite unsuccessful in getting very many companies and organisations to get accredited. And when I talk to them, apart from a few startups who are always very enthusiastic about this, most of them say, well, why would I need to? Farmers don't demand it of me. Farmers just come along and it doesn't matter what we've got in our terms and conditions or how eligible or legalese they are, they'll sign up anyway. So if you as a farmer want to make a difference in this space, you need to demand that your organisations have clear terms and conditions with how they deal with data. And I know we're going to have a session about that tomorrow. I'm not going to spend time on the common data vocabulary. Suffice to say it covers a whole lot of New Zealand and Australian farming information. Is probably useful elsewhere in the world as well. DataLinker is the connection framework that RMPP and Dairy NZ have put out across the industry. It's designed to help make data fair, findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable. And it involves organisations, we call them a coalition of the willing, coming together to define how they're going to interchange data. Beef and Lamb Genetics has been a fundamental mover in the DataLinker space, which is really exciting to us, and some of our meat processors are coming on board as well, and that's brilliant because, again, it will enable data to flow much more seamlessly with farmer permission. There's a whole load of stuff there about the sorts of things that you can send or transfer using DataLinker. I'm not going to spend any time on that. Thank you. And I have a question for you. Do you agree that that organisations need to be a bit more aware with how they talk to you about data and what your rights are? Do you think that's a sensible thing, or are you just pretty happy that they've got it sewn up?
To accept terms and conditions on most things. You can read through them and there might be something that you don't agree with, but if you want to use a tool, you've got no choice.
Absolutely, yep.
Yep, Peter Amer from Abacus Bio. Maybe a bit linked to some of the earlier questions and what you said, but there's often a feeling by people that collect data, that develop new devices, that there's a whole lot of IP inside that data and they kind of cling on to it. Is that mentality breaking down? Because it always seems to be incredibly disruptive to the sort of ideas that you're putting forward here.
Look, you're exactly right, Peter, and it's one of my frustrations that anyone who creates a new device tends to, and there are exceptions, including some of the people in this room, but tends to think that all of that data from that device is theirs. It'd be a bit like your camera manufacturer saying, well, every photo you own is ours because we developed the camera. Obviously, it doesn't quite work like that. Often, it's the raw data that their device is capturing too is not that valuable. You know, if you've got a smart ear tag that captures animal movements, then all it's capturing is where your animal's head is moving in different directions. And that raw data by itself is not that valuable. It's what you do with it. But we're still in that situation where a lot of organisations want to hold that data really close. They want to control it for their commercial advantage. And they will make data available, but only the process data at the end that says, oh yeah, I've worked out that that animal was eating 20% of the time.
Yeah, I don't expect you to answer this question fully, but I think it's something that those of us in the room need to think about, is who owns our genotypes?
That's a very interesting question. David will answer that question. I guess, and this might trip you up, David, but I guess the same fundamental question is asked in many cases is, whenever I commission a piece of work, there is no natural law that says who owns the outcome of that work. Yeah? If somebody creates a work, if somebody writes a document or takes a photo or something, the closest bit of natural law is one that says the person who actually took the photo or analysed the data or wrote the document owns that. Most of the time that's not satisfactory, and that's why we have contracts that say, if I commission you to do X, I own it. Or if I commission you to do X because it's as part of this, that organisation owns it. Does that make sense? And so that's why I think terms and conditions and contracts are really important, because they actually define what rights we have long term. Thank you.